Welcome to Seminar Sunday, District 21's weekly episodic webinar series. This week, we'll be discussing dealing with disruptive members. Hopefully, you're here just for some great information and not actually facing a situation where you have members that perhaps are disruptive. This is definitely a topic of great interest, but is never fun in the heat of the moment. This is part of a weekly series covering various Toastmasters related topics. Next week, we'll be talking about Chief Judge. Following that will be the Area Director role. And we've got lots of other great sessions coming up in February and beyond. Thanks again for spending this time with us today. Please feel free to utilize the chat on the left-hand side of your screen, or you can submit a question in the top menu bar there as well if you've got a particular question. The sessions are definitely designed to be interactive, so I'd love for you to jump in with thoughts, questions, concerns as we navigate through this topic, and we'll hopefully answer all questions that you've come to this session with. But what is this session? Well, really, it's going to be three aspects. Number one is exploring the challenges a disruptive member can have on our club. Number two, discuss handling disruptions. And number three, where to go for support if things escalate. It is totally possible you could be right in the middle of that right now where there's a situation that is heating up. You need to know where to turn to get the support that you need in order to make sure your club gets out of that situation as quickly as possible. So first of all, a Toastmaster leader once told me this. They said, when you walk into a struggling club, the problem is always in, it says the chair, but it's in a chair. You will likely recognize the problem the moment you walk through the door. Now, it's probably not fair to say this is 100% the case. There's varying reasons why a club may be struggling, but certainly one of the top reasons is just this. They've got a member who has signed up, attends the meetings, thinks they're doing a great thing, but perhaps they're actually disruptive in some way. And it could be they're interrupting speakers, it could be just their attitude, it could be a whole range of things that is driving guests away and also, therefore, retention of existing members. And it's unfortunate to watch these go down, but these things do tend to happen. And that's exactly why we're running this session, is to discuss how can we deal with something like this to prevent our club going down and finding challenging times. So what are some other impacts that the club would have if you have a challenge in the club with a disruptive member, no matter what it is? Any ideas? Start brainstorming perhaps, and I'll kind of plug along a bit here. And I've got a spot in here that I really want to brainstorm a little bit about what the exact impact to the club would be. Jim's just put in the chat, seek to understand what the member is trying to achieve. Absolutely, that's going to be a big part to resolving it. For sure. These are the kind of, I've just put on the screen here, 4 different types of issues that you may come across in a Toastmasters club. You've got your contentious personalities, a misunderstanding, issues, and styles of leadership. So specifically, when I walk through those 4, I think, okay, number one is a contentious personality. And that's the type of person where perhaps they're trying to control everything that's happening in the club. They may or may not even be an officer, but they're trying to kind of dictate what is happening in your club. Number 2, misunderstanding. So maybe let's say, for example, the president and the treasurer get in some sort of misunderstanding over a budget, and all of a sudden there's tension created in the club. And even though maybe the tension is only between 2 individuals, and the example I'm giving, the president and the treasurer, perhaps, just perhaps, that energy is being felt from guests and other members when they attend the weekly meeting. And if that doesn't get resolved in a relatively timely manner, then all of a sudden that's affecting the club as well in a negative way. The third one is issues. And of course, that could be a whole blanket of different things. But I think specifically when I refer to issues, we're talking about issues between two people. And it's not necessarily a misunderstanding. It's just that perhaps, person A doesn't like person B, and therefore there's no misunderstanding whatsoever occurring. It's just a dislike, and it has a very similar effect, of course, to a misunderstanding. People feel that, these two members won't make eye contact. Potentially it becomes an issue for your club because one can't be the speech evaluator for the other, or table topics master, they'd never call that speaker up, etc. Right? So it impacts a whole lot of things. And the fourth type rather is a style of leadership. And I think of this in a couple of ways. It kind of goes back and ties once again into potentially number one, but this I look at as more of a formal, you've got a club officer that has a certain style of how they think they should lead, and that can rub people the wrong way. Or the other extreme, really, which most people probably wouldn't consider disruptive, but I would suggest it is, where they're just not interested in committing and serving in their role, and therefore that shows in the club because they, for example, VP membership that doesn't have any new member applications, and that's a consistent issue, or the VP membership doesn't know how much it is to join the club. So it's barriers start to appear for new guests to become members and so forth. So I look at that as a bit of a disruption in the sense of not, like there's arguments necessarily about it, although that could come into play as well if the VP membership consistently isn't performing. But certainly it becomes a disruption to the behavior of the club as a whole, and therefore the quality. And once that tanks, then you're in a bit of trouble. So is there any other types that folks can think of that perhaps there's another type of issue that you could, I'm calling it issue, but of course issues is number three, but any other types of situations that you may come across that become a disruption, either in the traditional sense or in a non-traditional sense? Yeah, Jim, I think barriers with VPs not doing the job is definitely something that can become a huge challenge. Can you imagine, for example, the VP education not putting a schedule together? Well, first of all, there's probably going to be tension with some of the members and the officers for not creating the meeting schedule, which can become the disruption. But really, also, all of a sudden for your club just to be kind of slapping agendas together at the start of the meeting and everybody doesn't know what's going on and left from right, that becomes a disruption as well. And not in the traditional sense, like I said, where there's some sort of argument necessarily, but just the behavior of your club is disrupted as a result of the behavior. So there's the traditional, arguing that may be happening behind the scenes, or worse yet, in front of the scenes. But there can also be that subtle thing that happens with the quality of the meetings. They tank as a result. Casual Toastmaster versus the super enthusiastic Toastmaster member. So are you talking about somebody like me being with potentially somebody that is very casual? Yeah, that can certainly be an issue, really. If somebody doesn't necessarily care about their club or whatever happens to be success, and the other person's super serious about it, sure, there could be issues. Absolutely. There's some great leaders in Toastmasters that I've had a chance to get to know, and some of the things that they deal with is it's incredible. The amount of work that they go through in their service and everything, and they just shake their head at some of the things they see, for sure. That becomes a big disruption from their perspective. Any other types of challenges that you can see with disruptions or anything along those lines? Love to hear any of your perspectives as well, Marie, if you have any perspectives you wanted to share. Certainly not required. Out of bounds topics. Oh, thank you, Jim, for bringing this up, because there is nothing in the official governing documents of Toastmasters International restricting any particular topic. You can talk about anything you want in your club, but your club likely has an unwritten rule about what's appropriate and what's not. At least I'd like to think you do. So if you went in, for example, to your club and I don't know, you did a whole speech on potty humor, and yet everyone around the table was some sort of executive for different organizations and some real professional people, they're probably not going to appreciate that. If you go in and start joking around and acting like a comedian, but maybe you're part of a specialty club that's what you do, is you joke around, and that's okay. But maybe there's another topic that's not appropriate. In fact, District 21 has a club that they suggest that's the club to go to talk about those more risque subjects. One of the things that they gave the example way back when was there's a deer call in one of the municipalities that they happen to be in the area of, and that was a kind of a risque topic. I mean, you've got people that, of course, are animal lovers that are going to outcry over a deer call. And then maybe you've got some people that say, oh yeah, well they're eating my garden or whatever else, and they're going to be on the complete opposite side. So you can go in there and kind of debate about those types of topics. But most clubs, they're not going to take well to you going in and just talking about something that they feel is inappropriate. That's the important thing. I mean, we all have our individual beliefs of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate and where. But our club has absolutely an unwritten, or maybe you've got a special club that even has a written rule about what you don't talk about. And particularly a corporate club, you definitely don't want to get into any funny topics. And if you get into a topic that is very controversial, you also have to be prepared for kind of some outlash from that. I mean, if you got up and, I don't know, you said, I'm a huge fan of, Justin Trudeau, for example. He's a great prime minister. And then, somebody across the table may think quite the opposite. They're going to stand up and all of a sudden it can erupt into a little bit of a fight. And you can imagine the guests in the room shrinking behind the table. Oh, Lisa, yes. That is absolutely true. I'm seeing lots of great suggestions coming up here in the chat. A member not liking an evaluation and then unhappy with the evaluator. I have seen this exact scenario play out, and I'm not going to, of course, name the club or location or anything, but it was a club that I happened to be at, and this is, it's so sad how, the evaluator went in with a good heart, but it was, it's language. It comes down to language in many cases. And it could be a misunderstanding. It could be categorized by that, but this is a unique situation to recognize for sure. So what ended up happening with this is, this person did a good speech. It was very well done. The evaluator got up and just said, hey, you know what? I've seen you since you joined and you've come so far, and that was really good. And, just really praise them for, how much they've learned and grown through the Toastmasters program and how impressed they were with them. But the speaker receiving that evaluation took it completely the other way, that, they were saying that they were horrible before, and now they've grown, and it became really uncomfortable because we, in that case, there was other guests in the meeting, and they just didn't know what was going on because this individual stood up and basically freaked out about the evaluation they received. So that can be an easy thing to occur. So you do have to be very careful with those evaluations. And in this case, maybe they just overemphasize that, hey, you've grown so much, and a particularly sensitive person could go and think that's suggesting that they were not good at all when they walked through the door. So thank you, Lisa, for raising that. That's a really good example. And same thing, Jim, you mentioned, racial issues. And, that's another thing I heard a story about just today, actually, coincidentally enough, where, somebody in their speech had one line about, a certain colored person or whatever it happened to be. And, it was just completely an innocent line from the speaker's perspective. I mean, of course, I don't think anybody usually gets up intentionally to make people uncomfortable or offend others. But whatever it happened to be, I mean, that line, and I don't know the line, what it was word for word, but it resulted in someone else sending a 3-paragraph email to them, calling them out, like, hey, how inappropriate was this? So they got that. And now there's, going to be some tension between them. And luckily they weren't in the same club or anything, but certainly it's still not good for the speaker, because, they thought they were doing something innocent, and now they've got this, that feeling of, hard to explain exactly what that feeling is, but obviously disappointment that, their good intentions were misinterpreted. And, the evaluator also has or not in this case, it wasn't an evaluator, it was somebody in the audience, they've also felt offended, and, so they're both entitled to their opinions, but both parties are, kind of lose out in a situation like that. So it's sad to see. So moving on from that, though, I want to talk a little bit about the impact to your club. When you have someone in your club that perhaps is disruptive, or when you've got that situation where there's, perhaps that racial or political comment, or whatever it happens to be, or just issues between two people for whatever reason. What is the impact to your club? What happens over time if this is sustained? Yeah, I mean, Jim's probably got the real only answer for this one is, yeah, club members leave. It becomes uncomfortable to attend. And, we all have things we do outside Toastmasters. We all have a life. I love what I do, for example, with Toastmasters. This is one of the greatest things I've ever had the opportunity to do is serve as program quality director. I absolutely love it. But, at the end of the day, if I was having nothing but issues and, fighting within the team or something like that, and, it would be such a daunting task. It would just be like, forget it. I'd want to walk away. So, luckily I don't have that situation, but it's exactly the same in our clubs. I mean, if you're in a club, there's all these things happening and bubbling, people fighting, especially if it's, shouting matches or something right in the meeting. The club's going to die if it's not dealt with, and relatively swiftly at that. It's not something that you can just, we as, I find our culture here, at least in District 21, is kind of very passive. We don't want to upset people or whatever, and so therefore perhaps we're a little bit more tolerant to this type of thing than some other parts of the world may be. But it certainly has to be dealt with swiftly, or you're going to have that when club members leave. Well, what's the next thing that's going to happen? The club closes, and it can be as simple as one bad apple. It's one person that's in your club that's negative and problematic. All of a sudden, 6 months, a year later, your club could be locking its doors for good. And maybe you were 20 members before that, so that's 20 members that have lost out on their communication and leadership development in the Toastmasters education program because one person wanted to create problems, and I shouldn't say want to, because I don't think anybody necessarily comes in wanting to create problems, but whether it's their personality or an issue they have or a misunderstanding or topic of their speech, whatever it happens to be, there's some reason that they are causing a problem. And I've heard from other clubs as well, for example, that there's luckily it hasn't affected the club much, but they've had one member that he's I guess a big fan of Donald Trump, going back to that whole politics thing. So he goes in and does speeches talking about how great this man is, and of course, that maybe there's some other people that feel the same way in the club, but there's going to be people for sure that feel different about him, and away you go. All of a sudden you've got people getting really up in arms because of all the things that people in those leadership roles they convey. So there's definitely a concern there. And what else I wanted to touch on, and nobody's brought this up in the chat yet, so I thought I'd bring it up really quickly, is we have a brand. Toastmasters International has a brand. And, we've got a picture on the screen right now, which shows some of our branding. That's, when I say brand, a lot of people are going to think about our logo or our name mark or other visual indicators. But a brand also includes the feel of something. And a Toastmasters meeting is supposed to feel a certain way. And if you go and have a club meeting where people, for example, extreme here, they're shouting and whatever else, then you're not representing the brand. You're just making it seem like, oh, Toastmasters International is not where leaders are made. It's where fighters are made, or something like that, and totally diluting the brand. And people aren't going to go back to Toastmasters. That's always my biggest fear is, hey, you know what? That's what's motivating me inside right now to try and help clubs with their quality, is knowing that if you have meetings that are not of the highest quality week after week after week, people come in and they see that, they're like, this is Toastmasters International, this is a joke. And some people, maybe they don't even care about, let's say money's not an object for them, and they don't care that Toastmasters is, $45 US every 6 months. They'd rather go pay $2,000, for a short course from Myers-Briggs or whatever else that's offered. That's totally the type of thing that you can see if quality suffers. And I'm just trying to tie it all back to quality. Any other thoughts on things that can happen to your club? And then we're going to start to talk about how to resolve. Sorry, Maria, I know you had submitted this question. Speaking out of turn. Sorry, I did see you submitted that, and then I didn't mention that. So thank you for sharing that with me as well. Speaking out of turn is another thing that can upset people, for sure. So just calling out, trying to interrupt and putting in comments, for sure. I love your question, Jim. What if people don't bother to put an effort to do their assigned speeches, and people only seem to want to show up to play table topics like it's some sort of weekend social club? Oh, and this is so common in Toastmasters, to see people show up like, oh, I just want to do. We'll go down to your local table topic. Obviously, you can't table topics because that's a branding thing as well. But are you kidding? We've got an educational program, and I hope that people for the education program. So feelings are very strong about it, and I don't want to create conflict on this call about I feel about it. But certainly, that's definitely can be a source of disruption as well, because all of a sudden your quality is going downhill because people are just coming for their table topics. They're not doing prepared speeches, which is what helps people grow in a different way than table topics. So you're growing in multiple ways. Prepared speech is not the same as an impromptu speech. There's an education program to work, and people gaining those awards really keep the guests and new members going as well, and the cycle kind of just continues. And I'm not even going to touch upon things like the Distinguished Club Program and your club awards and all that, because that's not what the main goal is. But the main goal is every member in your club is working the education program, and that breeds success because you've got guests coming in and seeing that as normal. If you've got guests coming in and seeing, oh, great, these guys do half an hour worth of table topics and then there's some evaluations and then they go home. Well, I can do that with my buddies down at the bar or, at a restaurant. This is no program. Like, what is that? So, yeah, sorry, Jim, I had to go on a little rant there. I think it is important though, because your meeting quality suffers then. Is the ultimate thing that happens. I don't know if I'd call it a disruption, so I agree with you. It is semi-related, but meeting quality being bad is a disruption in a different way, for sure. You're seeing it. Yeah, I'm sure you are. I've left a club because I've seen it, and I don't know. I wouldn't sign up for a table topics club, sorry to say. Although I do remember a story from past international president Pat Johnson. She talked about a club she went down, and this is after she was international president, so very well-known individual in the organization. And I think it was a club somewhere in Texas or somewhere down in the States anyways. And they were actually playing cards for the meeting. Like, I kid you not, she couldn't believe it. Appalled, of course. There were some people playing cards, and that was not a positive experience, needless to say. So please, if you're going to do table topics, that's one thing, but definitely don't bust out the cards during your Toastmasters meeting, unless you're using the cards to draw a speaking order in a speech contest. So how do we resolve these things? Well, there's a number of options we have. Number one, which is, I'm going to speak for possibly myself and many other people in my circle. Yeah, sure, ignore it's an option. Is it the best option? Well, probably not. I mean, if it's very, very minor, perhaps, but that very, very minor can escalate quickly as well. So even that you have to use extreme caution with. Smooth it over. That's another option, usually temporary in nature. Force, that's an option, I guess. I would never use that option myself, but I guess if you're in a position where, you're the club president, for example, sure, you could turn around and say, hey, this is where we're going, and take it or leave it. We're going there. You're certainly not going to build many relationships that way, and your club is probably going to have more issues than less after that. Compromise, which is kind of where you say, you know what, I'm willing to go this way with, towards your direction. Let's meet somewhere in the middle. And then there's the collaboration, where you work together to create a resolution. So what look at these options? Are we told lose-lose, lose-win, or win-win? And the lose-lose and win-win are relatively self-explanatory. Lose-lose, both parties lose out. Win-win, both parties win. The lose-win is where somebody's walking away with some feeling like they've lost something or they've given up something in order to resolve the issue. So there's maybe things are solved, so to speak, but one person certainly has felt like they're not getting treated fairly or what they want or whatever the case happens to be. So going through them, ignore it, of course, is, what is that? That's probably lose-lose, because in all likelihood, that's going to blow up sometime in the future. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it's going to blow up. Smooth it over. That is likely going to be lose-lose in the long term. And usually somebody's giving up something in order to have it smoothed over. It could be even just their face. They've lost some face over it. So depending what happens, it's a lose-win or a lose-lose. Force, very much a lose-win. I mean, sure, the person that's kind of forced the issue is they're going to say they won, but the person that's been forced is going to say that they lost. And compromise, same thing really. It's a lose-win, and a much lighter version of a lose-win, I would suggest, than a force. But it's still, you're going to walk out of there feeling like, okay, I got this, but I had to get this, and you're not going to feel that good about it. Collaboration, on the other hand, is where you're working together to come to the resolution. So you're kind of taking emotion out of it usually, and just putting the thing on the table and saying, how do we resolve this jointly? Now, there's still going to be some elements likely of compromise in that. If you're butting heads over something, the chances are you both have opposing opinions to a topic, and it's very unlikely you can find just a perfect solution that's going to work exactly for both parties, although that does happen. So there may be some compromise in it, but at least you've come to the conclusion together, and therefore you get to the win-win, because you both feel like, you know what, we talked it out, we both agree to this approach, and although it was probably where neither party originally wanted to go, it's mutually beneficial. And I think that's the key. So I would suggest collaboration, of course, and I'm happy to hear opposing views to that. If people think that one of the other options are better, I would probably suggest that that's going to be your best one, collaboration. But Ewan submitted a great question regarding, what do you do if the person or party that they're not willing to collaborate, they just want it their way? Well, that's definitely a challenge, and I think that comes out in the conversation a bit. What we talk about next will help out with that as well. I can see that being a big issue, though, for sure, if people are very strongly opinion that it must be this way. But I think to some degree it's also the approach. I mean, I don't know, if I go up to you and I say, hey, I see that we disagree here. Can we sit down and discuss this and find out, how this can work? And or I want to learn more about this, and show more of a curiosity about it rather than I'm over here, I want to go to point A, you want to go to point B. That's crazy. Let's talk about this and see if there's a point C that we can go to. Don't even approach it that way. Just approach it as if, hey, I want to learn more about your idea, and through the conversation, try to elicit, okay, so what can we do that's going to be beneficial for everyone, and be honest. What our next step here in the process, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the strategies that you can use. So hopefully that'll help as well. And please follow up if you've got some more questions in just a moment here. Yeah, so Jim's mentioned getting to the objectives and not the strategies. So yeah, what is the goal? Let's say, okay, we want our club to be distinguished. Okay, great. And person thinks this is the way to do it. Person B thinks this is to do it, and they're opposing. Well, let's boil it back down to the objective and how maybe we can do both of those, for example. If you're working towards the same goal, likely going to be able to find common ground somewhere. And it may just be aspects of what you're working that you oppose. For example, you may agree that, okay, well, yeah, we need to gain some members. And, maybe one person says, yeah, I agree. And, let's put an ad in the newspaper. The other person says, let's run an open house. They're butting heads over that. It's like, well, maybe you can do both, or maybe, hey, let's talk about the pros and cons of each and weigh it out as a team, and just, it's not a compromise then, because and you're both going to leave that situation feeling better because you've talked it out, and you've likely either bought into their opinion or they've bought into yours. And it's not a perfect world. All right, just moving forward here, I do want to talk about some of the strategies to work together. But before I talk a lot about it, I want to share a story that I heard at the mid-year training, which was held in Seattle. And we heard from some other district leaders, and one of them shared it was kind of a comical story about conflict, if you can even suggest that that's possible. The individual gentleman, he wanted to get a used car. Now his spouse wanted to get a new car, and they were getting heated about it, then more heated, and things were escalating. They were getting more and more frustrated with each other about this whole issue. I mean, he was thinking about it from a perspective of, okay, we could save a few dollars instead of driving off the lot and immediately, boom, there goes 40% of the value. Let's just, buy that car at 60% with a couple of, miles put on it. Whereas she was looking at it as, some beat up death trap that, they're going to drive around. So very different views. And instead of sitting down and collaborating about it and discussing, why they feel so strong, they just butted heads, and it got hotter and hotter and hotter. And, just spoiler alert here, they, they're still married. So it didn't obviously get that heated that it ended the marriage or anything, but it did boil up. And, in a way, how they were going with it was more of, waiting for one of them to make that sacrifice and compromise and say, okay, well, let's do this. And they both had obviously very differing opinions. Like I said, one looks at it as, paying 60% of the value for a car that's lightly used. The other person looks at it as, a piece of garbage death trap that they wouldn't want to drive. Very, very different views. And this is a real life scenario that you can hopefully relate to as well. If you've ever bought a car and had a disagreement with a significant other about it, or, bought anything big really with anyone, then that there can certainly be different opinions. I can think of, when I bought my house, for example, it was, for me, I was like, I don't really care about this or that. And my significant other felt very strongly about certain aspects of the house that they didn't like. And, it was just kind of like, really, are we going to not buy a house because, in this case, it was something to do with the counter in the kitchen. It was, from my perspective, a small thing, but, definitely these types of things can happen, and they're very extreme, of course, because you're not likely to see that necessarily in your Toastmaster club, but it could be about meeting venue. That's a big thing. Do we take the free room that is freezing, and it's maybe it's in a dark church basement, and it's they don't have any heat in the winter or whatever, or do we pay $50 a night for a meeting in this really nice venue with audiovisual and all this, that, and the other? There's going to be people around the table that are frugal and like, hey, let's just take the free space. And then there's going to be other people that are like, hey, you know what, this space is worth the $50 a night because it's professional and this, that, and the other. Going to be a lot of different opinions in a case like that. That's a real life Toastmaster situation right there. So here's how we work together. Here's how we collaborate and make it work. And this comes directly, actually, these 4 points came from the training that I attended last weekend. So I'm happy to be able to share it. First thing is separating the people from the problem. And I think that is really important, because sometimes we start to, look at it as, this person, instead of going back to it, just what is our objective here? Because they're coming and they're likely trying to get the same goal as you're trying to get. That Distinguished Club example, you're trying to get Distinguished Club and person B is trying to get Distinguished Club. You just both have differing opinions how to get there. So instead of getting mad and taking it personally, this person, say, hey, you know what, we both want this. And getting back to that question a minute as well, it's absolutely possible to get a collaboration then, because you can approach the person and you can say, hey, you know, this is where we're both trying to go. Can we talk about the best approach to get there? You know, I like some, if you do, I like some aspects of, you know, where you're going. I think I've got some ideas that can enhance it. Really try to make it almost a sales pitch. And you can be honest as well. You can say, hey, when this, I felt like this. Using I statements is very powerful. Instead of trying to say you, because of course you puts people on the defense. Whereas if you say I felt this, then there's that personal connection that is really powerful as well. Similar note, you know, focusing on the interest, not the position. So once again, we want to get distinguished club, not you want to do it this way, I want to do it this way. We both have an interest in doing this, you know. Let's say you got two people running for president. Hey, we both want to see our club be successful. So instead of saying, you know what, you're a jerk because you're running against me or whatever else you want to say, no, you know what, you want to compete against me for club president. We're both, you know, we both want to support the club and achieve success, and maybe try to find out where each of you feel like in terms of why those two people want to be club president. Then you generate the options for the mutual gain. So once we're kind of covering this off really as we go through it. That's exactly what you do is put all the options on the table. How can we both get what we want? And sure, it's not going to be exactly word for word what you want, because then there would have been no conflict to begin with, but maybe it's a different approach to what you both wanted, and it's even better. That's where it's really nice, is when it ends up being better than what you both proposed initially. And of course, using objective criteria. So going back to that I statements, going back to using facts and not, you know, saying, I think this is the best way to go, or this is how we should go. That's a bad word, should. It's just, hey, you know, the fact is our club has 12 members. Well, as long as that's the truth, they really can't argue that. I mean, sure, they may try to say, oh, yeah, but we got 2 guests that are coming on a regular basis. Well, yes, but right now there's 12 paid members in our club. And if those 2 members, or 2 guests rather, do sign up, then yes, we'll have 14 members. It's very hard to argue with facts. So just something to consider is, you know, when you are going through that situation where you're discussing things with them, make sure you're using that fact-based information in order to work together on whatever it is you happen to be doing. Any questions on that, or other things that you've seen or used? All right, well, I do see your comment there, Lisa, that you have no questions. And if anybody else has questions or thoughts or additions, please feel free to chime in anytime. We've got until we say goodnight to keep asking the questions, and even thereafter, feel free to contact me if you ever need anything. So that's how we kind of pave the path to work together to find that common ground. To finish this portion here, I also want to go back to that, you know, car story, just because I felt a little cheated when he originally told the story, because that was basically how the story was told. Okay, so you know, I made a joke. I said, okay, so what happened? You ended up getting the new car, right? You know, and everybody kind of laughed, and it was, you know, fine. But in reality, what they ended up doing is a friend, he posted as, this was kind of funny from my perspective. Here we go talking about inappropriate. He said, well, actually, luckily my friends were getting divorced, and one of them was moving out of state. He was from the US. So they said, hey, does anybody want to buy our car? And his spouse ran up to him and said, hey, well, why don't we get their car? So that was kind of a funny ending to it as well. It's just, I think that the spouse's opinion wasn't that all, secondhand cars were an issue. It was more the source of them that they likely had the discomfort with, because the best friend's car, or friend's car rather, was completely fine. The fact that it was secondhand, the real issue there was exactly that rather than it being, a secondhand car from a lot where, somebody's doing potentially some shady business practice or whatever it might be. It was just, all right, well, this we know, we've seen them driving the car works fine, we're saving the money, go for it. So in the end, they did actually come to somewhat of a compromise in some way, in the sense of they both were happy with the end result, and they really both did get their way to some extent. So, all right, I did see a question in somewhere here. Nope, okay, maybe not. Thanks again, everybody, for your comments. So now, where do you go next? So I've got a map of service to the members on the screen, and I'd love to blow it up a little larger. I really should have put it on larger, but there's that should word again. Let's just work with what we have, though, on the screen. So if you are having a challenge with anyone in your club, of course, your first step is going to be to try and resolve it. Absolutely. You want to do everything you can. So you're going to have the conversations likely with the individual about, hey, when this is happening, this is causing a problem for me. You are then going to go to a club officer and talk to them about it and make them aware of the issue, particularly if it's a serious issue. Like if we're talking about some sort of almost like a harassment type thing, or bullying, or anything along those veins. I mean, absolutely jump on that as quickly as you can, because like I said, that is absolute pure poison to the club and just a negative experience for everyone involved. If you are not able to get support or resolution to the challenge from the club officer that you deal with, you're going to go to the highest ranking club officer you can. So you go to the president, you talk to them. If the president is unwilling to help, maybe they're the one that is causing the challenge, or whatever the case happens to be, the likelihood is you'll have the urge to contact your area director or division director for support, maybe even your district director. But it's important to note that no one on the district team, which includes division and area directors, has a say in what happens in the club. So they are not able to mediate the issue or resolve the issue. What they may be able to do is, if you reach out to them, they can give you some suggestions or some details of what do you do when this happens. But they won't be able to come in, for example, and say, all right, we're gonna take out your club president. That's not something that the area director has any say in whatsoever. So that leaves us in a spot. Okay, well, what do we do? Well, what we do is, if we have tried with the highest ranking club officer to resolve it and it's going nowhere, you would actually contact World Headquarters for support. What the first thing they'll want to know, of course, is, have you talked to the highest ranking club officer you can about this situation, as per, I believe it's policy and protocol 3.0, if anybody wanted to look it up in the governing documents. Then you go from there. And they do have measures in place to help with any type of matter related to someone's behavior in the club, if it is getting that bad. In fact, there is a disciplinary committee that is made up of past international presidents and past board members, and usually a few other people, I believe. So they meet. I can't remember if there's a set schedule or if it's just as needed, and they actually go through the process of interviewing members that have been involved in this, including the person that's being accused of wrongdoing. And so they're able to kind of work on a resolution if it is just somebody that's actually a problem. I'm not referencing just a disagreement now necessarily. So if you had somebody that was, getting up in meetings and swearing or throwing furniture around or doing something else that's very unlikely to see, but I mean, it could happen, right? Another thing that I know they had a couple of years ago was, there was somebody actually going around and promoting another organization, and this person was an area director. I can't remember, they were somewhere in the US or somewhere else, but they were going into their clubs and promoting another organization. So using it almost as like a sales thing. So of course that's really unprofessional conduct. And so they have the ability to remove in good standing if it gets that bad. So that's just something to consider. If, hopefully I'm really crossing my fingers that nobody's on this call tonight because you're in that boat and you're more just thinking of conflict resolution type thing. But if you are in that situation, know that you do have recourse that taking, and that involves world headquarters. But you can always come to any district officer for just support and like, hey, I'm having this issue. Is this something I could raise with world headquarters? Or, that type of thing. Sure. I mean, we can answer questions, but we can't get directly involved with the situation. So that is basically all. I'm ready to close here. I'll put up my contact details as well. I always put that up at the end of the seminar Sunday. So there's my email. If you want to email me, we can either have a quick email exchange or phone call if anybody ever wanted to chat about anything. And if anybody has any questions, because we are finishing just a couple minutes early, I'm happy to address any of them. If not, then I will give you the 3 or 4 minutes free time here at the end of the call. Anything? Going once? Going twice? Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and hopefully you can attend Seminar Sundays in the next couple of weeks. We've got an exciting lineup talking about, the role of the area director, talking about speech contests again, how to be a chief judge, and so much more. I want to thank everybody for spending their Sunday evening with me, and take care. And thanks, Jim, for the reminder as well to send out the reminder emails. I don't actually send them out. Somebody sends them out for me, so I have to rely on that. But that is a good idea because certainly attendance tends to be a lot higher, particularly when we send out a reminder on the Fridays. Thanks a lot. Have a great day, everybody.